Assalamu alaikum, welcome to another video. This is the third video in the SAT English series, and in this video I am going to talk about the inference questions, how you can solve it, and we'll see some examples just like we did in the previous videos. So let's get started without further ado. What do we have in the inference questions, how to deal with them? So first let's talk about that. अच्छा जी, inference questions जो हैं उसके अंदर these questions will contain an unfinished passage that introduces information about an unfamiliar topic. Based on that information, you have to select the choice that most logically completes the text. So you will be inferring something out of the passage, whatever you will read, and then you will select the option which will complete that text. So it's a bit tricky as compared to the previous two questions that we have covered. It takes some thinking. Inference questions are all about how we connect the information and ideas to create arguments. Now, arguments further have two types, as you can see on the screen. It's premises and the thesis. So premises is basically the context, उस passage के अंदर किस चीज़ का थोड़ा सा background create किया गया, and then thesis is the central idea of that whole argument. What is the main argument and what the whole passage is supporting to. तो वो जो हर चीज़, हर एग्जाम्पल, हर पॉइंट जिस चीज़ की तरफ जो है इशारा कर रहा है और जिस चीज़ के रिवर्ट बैक कर रहा है, that is basically your thesis statement. So that central idea, central theme, हम उसको thesis का नाम देते हैं, ठीक है. तो inference question में सबसे पहले जब आपने पढ़ना है तो आपने ये realize करना है कि इसमें premises कौन सा है, इसके अंदर context कौन सा है इस पूरे text के अंदर, और इसमें main idea thesis कौन सा है. Once you have that thesis, it will be easier for you to find the relevant argument to complete that information, because you will understand what the writer is coming from, where the writer is coming from, and what actually he or she wants to talk about. Let's look at an example of the inference questions. So here you can see adaptations to the cold temperatures have high metabolic costs. It is expensive in terms of energy use for land, plants, and animals to withstand very cold temperatures, and it gets more expensive the colder it gets, which means that the lower the air temperature, the fewer species have evolved to survive it. This factor, in conjunction with the decline in the air temperature with increased elevation, explains the distribution of the species. Diversity in the mountain ecosystem, you find fewer species high up the mountain than at the mountain's base, because now we have to complete this. There is a dash. Which choice most logically completes the text? So whatever I talked about just a few seconds ago, you just need to identify what are what's the premises and what's the thesis in this whole passage. So what the passage is mainly trying to convey, right? इसमें से अब सबसे पहले वीडियो को थोड़ा सा पॉज कर लो और इसमें से लोकेट करो कि इसमें थीसिस कौन सा है, सेंट्रल आइडिया कौन सा है. Well, as we are clear from this that it gets more expensive the colder it gets, which means that the lower the air temperature, the fewer species have evolved to survive it. This is basically what the central idea is, and the whole previous factor and the other information which is coming after it is basically what is supporting and reverting back to this main idea that the fewer species have evolved to survive it. So जो ये पैसेज समझाना चाह रहा है, जो कहना चाह रहा है और जिसके इर्द गिर्द रिवॉल्व कर रहा है, वो ये है कि जितना टेम्परेचर कम होता जाएगा, यानी कोल्ड टेम्परेचर होता जाएगा, उतना फ्यूवर स्पीशीज़ वहाँ पे सर्वाइव कर सकती हैं. ज़्यादा स्पीशीज़ जो हैं वो हायर टेम्परेचर में एग्जिस्ट करती हैं, यानी कि उनको ज़्यादा सर्दी में सर्वाइव करना उनके लिए मुश्किल हो जाता है, एंड दैट्स जस्ट लॉजिकली मेक सेंस एज वेल. नाउ देयर आर four options and we have to eliminate the wrong ones, and we will be left with a good one. This is the strategy that you will always be relying on. So which choice most logically completes the text? There are relatively few environments hospitable to species that are adapted to live in low air temperatures. This is exactly opposite to what the main thesis is about, the main argument is about. So we can minus the option A. In the B, there are relatively few species with the adaptation necessary to tolerate the temperature at high elevations. Somehow is what the main thesis was about, so we can't minus it. Adaptation that allow plants and animals to survive in rocky environments are metabolically costly. It is talking about something really specific and something which was not the major part of the conversation. Rocky environments is not what we are dealing here, so we can eliminate the C option. And indeed, some mountain environments are at elevations so high that no plants or animals can survive them. That's all about the height, focusing on the height but not the temperature factor, so we can minus this option as well. So the most appropriate answer in this category is going to be the B option, which is resonating with our thesis as well. So this is how you solve the inference question. Let's look at another example. Off-Broadway theaters emerged in the late 1950s as a rebellion against mainstream Broadway theaters. In New York, freeing artists to create productions that were more experimental than typical Broadway shows. One such artist was playwright Maria. Working with off-Broadway theaters enables her not only to direct her own plays, but also to direct them exactly as she intended them to be staged. Regardless of how strange the results might have seemed, the audiences accustomed to Broadway shows, and in this way she dash. So what's the main idea here? What's the main takeaway? What is the whole thing जिसके इर्द गिर्द वो around जिसके इर्द गिर्द कह लो कि वो fall कर रहा है. So pause the video and try to find out that. Okay, so create production that were more experimental than typical Broadway shows, and that is the main idea. I mean, the off of Broadway allowed. So in the beginning, इस पूरे जो prompt है उसका जो starting sentence है, that is basically its thesis statement. So we will be relying on that, and the rest is just an explanation which is supporting that main thesis. So that's how it is done. Now that we have identified the main thesis statement, we will read out the options and we'll try to relate which is the best suitable option in this case. Choice number A would have been more famous if she had created plays that were mainstream instead of experimental. It's not about being famous, it's about experimenting new things and trying out new things, so we can minus the A option. B is recognized that staging an off-Broadway play was more complicated than staging a Broadway play. It could have been more complicated, but that's not the main idea. The main idea is that it allowed her to be more creative. The off of Broadway allows the creators to do something which they really wanted to in the way they intended to do it. So we will again going back to that line, and it's not exactly going well with that main argument, so we can minus the option B. Number C, wrote plays that would have been too expensive to produce if someone else had directed the production. So she wrote the plays that would have been too expensive to produce if someone else had directed the production. So is it something which is relating to that? It somehow is not really tangential. Going with that, I mean, but we can park it, not exactly the same. Just read out the last option. Illustrates the artistic opportunity offered by off-Broadway theaters. Now, is she illustrating the opportunity offered by theaters, or now we have to choose between option C and D. C seems like more appropriate. Why? Because it just caters to the point that typically Broadway shows New York freeing artists to create productions that were more experimental than typical Broadway shows, and people normally when they do experimental stuff, obviously that's expensive if you are allowing other production people to chip into it, and अगर वो participate करें उसके अंदर, that could be expensive. We can't rely on the last one. Illustrates the artistic opportunity, क्योंकि वो सिर्फ उस एक artistic opportunity तो है, लेकिन significantly वो उसी के इर्द गिर्द जो है वो घूम नहीं रहा. That I think becomes sort of too specific to one singular point, but we have to find an option which can just support the main thesis or argument. So in this, I think the D option is becoming that in this way she illustrates the artistic opportunity offered by. So that could be we can eliminate that, and we are left with the C option, which is wrote plays that would have been too expensive to produce if someone else had directed the productions. राइट तो क्योंकि उसके पास खुद चॉइस थी, उसने अपनी मर्जी से वो प्लेस लिखे जिनको वो जिस तरह से लिखना चाहती थी, जिस तरह करना चाहती थी, तो पूरा पैसे जो है हमें उस तरफ हाईलाइट करवा रहा है, ना सिर्फ ये कि वो एक बड़ी आर्टिस्टिक अपॉर्चुनिटी थी और उसने उसके ऊपर अवेल किया या उसके ऊपर एक्सपैंड किया. सो इन दिस केस वी आर गोइंग विद द सी ऑप्शन. Another example, the last one, let's try to solve this. The Hubble telescope is projected to maintain operations until at least 2030, but it has already revolutionized high-resolution image of solar system bodies in visible and ultraviolet light waves. Notwithstanding that only about 6% of the bodies imaged by Hubble's Space Telescope are within the solar system. NASA researchers Cindy L. Young and colleagues assert that a new space telescope dedicated exclusively to solar system observed would permit an extensive survey of minor solar system bodies and long-term UV observations to discern how solar system bodies change over time. Young and colleagues' recommendation therefore implies that HSC blank. So now the main idea is that we want a replacement. We don't necessarily the replacement. We want a new thing, a new telescope for the smaller objects. ठीक है? That assert that a new space telescope, ये वाली line जो है ना, Cindy L. Young and colleagues assert that the new space telescope dedicated exclusively to solar system observation would permit an extensive survey to the minor solar system bodies and long UV observation to discern how solar system bodies change over time. So we need something new which will be specific for finding the small things in the space. Which wise most logically completes the test? Remember this line and keep on coming back to this line whenever you have to choose the main idea. Whenever you have to choose an inference question. Number 8, will likely to continue be the most primarily to observe objects outside the solar system. All right, because we are talking about the small things, but let's just park it here because it's not entirely wrong. Let's read out the other options. और अगर हमें लगा कि वो ज़्यादा incorrect हैं तो हम automatically minus करते करते correct के पास पहुंच जाएंगे. Second option, Hubble Space Telescope will no longer be used to observe solar system objects if the telescope recommended by Young and colleagues is deployed. So once again, I would just reiterate the point that it's not about replacing it. It's about making a new telescope, right? We are not trying to replace the existing telescope. So that option is incorrect. We can minus it. C, can be modified to observe the features of solar system objects that are of interest to Young and colleagues. Now, the idea of, you just need to ask yourself, was it the main idea? Was it the main thing why this passage was written? I wouldn't say yes, because इसमें वो बात ये कर रहे हैं कि हमारे पास एक ऐसा नया टेलीस्कोप होना चाहिए जो कि स्मॉलर ऑब्जेक्ट के लिए हो. वो ये नहीं कह रहे कि हम इसी को अगर इस तरह से मॉडिफाई करें तो देन वी कैन ट्रांसफॉर्म दिस एग्जिस्टिंग इनटू द काइंड ऑफ अ टेलीस्कोप व्हिच कैन सी द स्मॉलर ऑब्जेक्ट्स एज वेल. सो वी कैन माइनस द ऑप्शन सी. And these lacks the sensors to observe the wavelength of light, and they are not criticizing the existing telescope, and they are not talking about what is lacking in that. They are suggesting a new one which is focused to find small objects. So we can minus the last three options, B, C, and D. We are left with the option A, and that is your correct option. Why? Because first of all, वो शुरू में उसने बोला हुआ कि it is maintain operation until at least 2030, तो हम इसको use करते रहेंगे. And obviously it is used to see the large objects, and for the smaller one they are suggesting a new telescope, so will likely to continue to be used primarily to observe objects outside of the solar system. So A is your correct answer. And this is, friends, how you do the inference questions in your SAT English. And I hope you find this video helpful, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.